Hey, Dad, Mom, I'm trying something out new. I wanted to be able to help you guys with health by giving you snapshots of truth that are very easy to understand and also use the resources I have, not like the gadgets, and then record something and put it on YouTube and then send the YouTube link to Mom. And I want you both to watch and listen to this video. And I'm going to try to make it relatively short and under 20 minutes, hopefully. And it has to do with the ideal human diet in general. And I'm going to explain a few things. And but this is also practice for some of my podcasting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize, putting on my glasses, I'm going to minimize the camera that's showing me. Now it's showing my computer. This is a pointer that I'm directing. And I have my tablet here set up so that I can do kind of a left and right column comparison or contrast. And it'll make it easier to understand what I'm about to share with you. So we have my tablet open, but we gotta connect my computer to my tablet, which is going to just simply require going into my files and going into my desktop. Actually, you know what? I found it right here. It's outside the window for recording. Okay, screen copy. That file. This file. It should show up in a minute. Oh, there we go. There is my tablet. Alright, cool. Now it's my tablet, no longer my computer. It's kind of cool, isn't it? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up my Samsung Notes. I'm going to go to up here in the top right corner, Notes, and that little red one, that, and we're going to go, I practiced a little bit before with the column thing. We're going to open a new note, okay? Okay. So, I'm going to title this Optimal or ideal human diet. This is the handy dandy little chart, right? Okay, that's titled. So the optimal or ideal human diet. Diet not referring to, we used to think diet referred to not eating food. You go on a diet, you all of a sudden eat less food or healthier. No. Diet here just refers to your overall food intake. Okay? So we're going to do a chart. I'm going to use, let's use white. Okay, now let's make it, yeah, we'll use white. easier to see. That. Oop. Okay. So that's me writing on my tablet. I don't know what happened there. Oh, I must have hit something. Let's try it again. Alright, sorry about that. So, we're going to name these columns These are broad categories, so ground, separated, the ground, literally the ground, and ground connected. Right? Ground separated and ground connected. And this refers to the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, generally speaking. So, let's break it down. Let's first name the ones. And this all has to do with eating an optimal human diet. And when I say optimal, I'm not talking about a diet that you can eat. There's tons of diets you can eat. I'm talking about the optimal or ideal diet in general for every human being. But you have to understand this distinction first, because if you don't, you're going to look at food the same way you have all your life. And we, as Americans, have already been brainwashed. It's time to unlearn what we've learned and to actually think critically about something. So, I'm not saying you guys don't think critically. You do. I'm just saying I'm gonna show you something where you're gonna realize that you're gonna start thinking critically about this specific issue. You'll know what I'm talking about once we're done. So, let's go down to the ground separated. That basically, let's sum it up as mobile creatures versus immobile creatures, or stationary versus moving. Right? Okay, so what kind of mobile or moving creatures or organisms, because they're both living. Both of these are living. Both of them are living, okay? So when people eat primarily plant-based or fruits, vegetables, grains, they often argue against people who eat animals and say that you're a butcher, you're horrible, you're evil, blah, blah, all this stuff. They don't realize that, first off, their diet's more expensive because of agricultural usage and techniques of the land. Secondly, they butcher way more bugs and ecosystems out in the fields when they do create certain plants. And third, these people don't realize that they're butchering plants. They kill plants because plants are living, trees are living, and they kill them. So they're, when a vegetarian talks about a meat eater or an omnivore, someone who's willing to eat meat as well as plants, and makes it look like they are inhumane or They don't care about the animals. Well, those very same people don't care about the plants and their living creatures too. So I don't want this self-righteous attitude that many vegetarians that I have heard in debates take is uncalled for, unnecessary, and hypocritical. So, we're not talking about morality or inhumane treatment. So far as I'm concerned, if you kill an animal or a plant, you should do it quickly in a humane way, which causes the least amount of pain possible. And up until then, you should treat the animal or the plant with love, with kindness, and with goodness. And treat your living organisms that are under your care the way God wants us to treat the earth. And even if we use it for food. So, anyways, having said that, most of what we eat to live, aside from minerals, which are basically rock elements, or, rocks in the periodic table. When I think of minerals, I think of rocks, but basically they're just elements of the earth. Most of what we eat is living, or was living, and we killed it, right, for food. And this includes everything I'm going to put on this chart here. Under the left column here, we have the mobile or moving food. So what is that? So let's do birds, the ones that fly in the air, beasts, the larger animals on the land roamers, fish. I'm going to put sorry about that. Fish or aqua animals, and I'll also put, because we can eat them, bugs. We can eat them if we want. And also the naturally processed, like if you just whip up milk and you form butter, animal-based but natural things that, like an egg or dairy. These are all what you call basically animal products, right? And we can eat all this. Now, maybe not all of it. There are some bugs we can't eat. It's too much bacteria. We'd have to cook it. But the problem is when you cook a bug, most of it burns up. We're probably not meant to eat bugs as much. In fact, it's a Bible verse that says there are certain kind of creatures not to eat, and it has to do with cleanness and uncleanness. Now, let's move over to the second column, and if you think that this isn't important, trust me, you're going to see what I'm talking about afterwards, and you're going to agree with me in terms of, this makes perfect sense, and this was good for you to have known, and then you can make a choice based upon it. You still make your own choices, but I'm going to explain a few things. But we have to look at it from the perspective, even writing it down, just looking at it with our own eyes. Okay, so those are the mobile or moving living organisms. Let's go over to the immobile and stationary organisms, that is, organisms that are connected to the ground. So let's start out with, let's go with ancient. And they were very big. There were giants in this world at one point, and there were giant trees. And there are literally certain tree stumps that are out there that are huge. So trees have been around for a long time on Earth. And trees produce certain things. So what do they produce? Fruit and nuts, right? Or kind of like seeds for trees, but nuts. So there are fruits, and there are nuts in the tree. Many of the trees actually want us to eat their fruit. Many plants don't want us to eat anything, but many trees do, because it spreads their seeds, so to speak, in our fecal matter. So those are trees. And then the next one would be more the bushes, more of the smaller ones, which are like bushes, and what you find in gardens. So we'll just call them veggies or vegetables. Fair enough, easy enough. The next one would be grass. Cows eat grass. We don't, because our stomachs cannot move the grass through. It doesn't really do anything with it. Their systems are set up. We're going to get back into that in a few minutes, but and what that means for us. But they do eat grass, but we eat the seeds of grass. They're called grains. So there are families of grasses, and those families have seeds, the seeds, and those are grains, and there are many kinds of grains. Wheat, barley, oats, blah, blah, blah. And then the fourth one would be tubers and roots. That is stuff that grows underground. And those are probably the best things for us because they're the closest to the ecosystem. Most of their tissue has more naturally ecosystem bacteria on them. And tubers and roots are probably one of the more safer ones to eat for humans. And there are certain vegetables that we eat, spices and herbs that come from tubers and roots. And then the last one would be a very special kind of, not root or tuber, but grown in the dirt or grown underground. It is the mushroom. And you obviously have medicinal mushroom, and you also have more edible, generally edible mushrooms. Okay, let's make sure this is... All right. Now, that's the broad categories of what we generally eat, right? Right there. All that right there is the paleo diet. All that natural stuff. And that's the stuff we should be eating. Not a bunch of chemicals concocted together by a corporation. Generally. But our bodies will tolerate it for a certain, even longer period of time, because our bodies have liver, and the liver filters everything, And there's even very closed doorways. Our body will not allow even certain things in our bloodstream. Our liver will detoxify. And there's even what you call the blood-brain barrier, where certain things are not even allowed in your brain because it's considered toxic. So your body does everything it can to hold off any foreign invader in any area where it doesn't belong. In other words, your body has defense mechanisms to make sure that things are put into place and highly controlled. One example is you can only have so much sugar in your blood at one time. And the main sugar that you really should only have in your blood is glucose, which is the most simplest sugar, and it's the sugar that your body itself makes. But the moment you add more sugar into the bloodstream, you're causing what I would call a diabetic effect or a diabetic phenomena. And that is you're heightening your sugar amount in your blood, and that can have disastrous consequences if it's too much. But if it's a little too much, your body will put up with it. But if you do that over the course of time, it causes disaster like type 2 diabetes, which is what most adult Americans have. I'll explain that in another video. Let's go down. Let's extend this. You're going to see how this starts to make more and more sense. Now, let's look at the way, why did I start out with the top part? What's connected to the ground and what's moving around outside of being connected to the ground. What's mobile and moving versus what's immobile and stationary. Well, the movers have bodies or organic tissue structure, materials, and machinery, bodies or forms, what you might call, or structures that make it able to move, and that is more complex than the ones that are stationary because it requires more moving parts. The muscles needed to move the bones in the joints for moving and mobile creatures, birds, beasts, fish, bugs. That the skeleton, some bugs have exoskeletons, but if you look at the differences between the organisms of the tissue of mobile versus immobile creatures or living organisms, there's a higher amount of complexity among the moving creatures because there's a larger amount of necessity for machine operations. Okay? So the movers, we'll call the animals the movers and the shakers, right? The movers and the shakers are the animals of all kinds, whether they're in the air or in the sea or on the land, and or even digging under the ground but still not connected to the ground. They require the machinery that allows them to do that, to move. Plants don't have that. And that's why the storage, what we store for the nutrients needed to build and rebuild the muscles for the movers and the shakers, that storage has a higher amount in a larger variety of nutrients than the plants do. And that's why, on a smaller scale level, molecular level, the plants have a simpler molecule. So what's the molecular structure of most plant and animal, or most plant and tree and grass or grain tissue? It is carbohydrate. Carbohydrate, which is sugars. A carbohydrate is a sugar. A sugar is a carbohydrate. There are complex sugars or complex carbohydrates. There are simple sugars, which are simple carbohydrates. A carbohydrate is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but its structure on a molecular level in the bonding between the atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen is a simpler bonding structure. It's kind of almost like a ring, but it's simpler in terms of there's like less bonding overall, and overall it well, let's just get into fat, because on the left side, in order to move around, these creatures often generally need a lot more fatty acids and proteins. Okay? Now, proteins have different jobs in the body. There are different kinds of proteins. There's even, and there is proteins in plants, and there is carbohydrates in animals. So we're not saying this is like literally 100% versus 100%. We're saying this is a large majority versus a large majority. So the movers and the shakers need the fat for energy. Oops, let's go back. Why it's doing that? Energy. And also insulation, but we'll just go with energy for now. And hormones. Highly affects our hormonal system. And the proteins, amino acids, aminos, proteins, muscles. You've heard, get more protein in, it builds muscle. Well, what builds protein? Amino acids. Fatty acids are a different kind of acid. So we need fatty acids and amino acids on a basic molecular level. Generally speaking, a lot more of it. And the plant kingdom and the tree kingdom and the grass kingdom, they need a lot more carbohydrates stored. Why? First off, what I have here, they don't move. The plants don't, and because they don't move, they don't need as much protein and fat. They do have proteins, and some plants do have fatty acids in them. So once again, this is not a 100% versus 100%. This is a large majority versus large majority. But because of the complex machinery of our body, it needs a large majority or a large density of fat and protein when we eat versus carbohydrates. Now, when we do eat carbohydrates, it does have, certain carbohydrates have fatty acids in them. Carbohydrates that have been eaten by certain bacteria have been turned into short chain fatty acid items called fermented food. There's proteins that are chemicals on the plants that actually cause inflammation in the human body. So this is complex, but I'm trying to make it really simple to look at it from the standpoint of our basic structure and what is the optimal diet based upon our basic structure. We are closer to animals than we are to plants when it comes to mobility. There are, you can go onto YouTube and you can find plenty of people say you should eat walnuts because they look like a brain and it's healthy for the brain. You should eat this or that because it looks like that in the human body. Like there's, tree root systems look like our nervous system. So there are similarities. I'm not saying we don't have similarities with trees and plants, but what I'm saying is when it comes to mobility, we are a lot closer to the mobile creatures than the immobile creatures. And because of that, we need more energy and we need a more specific toolkit of proteins that allow our muscles to be built and the energy to build them. And those are found in much higher doses and amounts in animal tissue than in plant tissue. Because plants don't need that. Trees don't need that. They're stationary. They're not moving. Animals and fish and birds move, and bugs. We move a lot more. We are not connected to the ground. Whereas the stationary organisms, the ones that are not movers and shakers, they are connected to the ground. And their movement is very slow. Some of the plants do move. They move towards the sun when they need to engage in photosynthesis. And they do need the sun. And we do too, for different reasons. We need the sun a lot, for a lot of reasons actually. But anyways, there's that. Okay, so now that I've said that, what is the optimal human diet based upon the form or structure of our bodies? The optimal human diet for humans is carnivore or which is pure animal products, or large percentage of animal products. Over here would be the vegetarian or vegan diet. Actually, no. And let's erase that. Where's the eraser? Do you know where the eraser is, Dad and Mom? Area eraser. All right. All right, there you go. That's the ideal human diet for the for humans. Now, you may think, no, it can't be. Plants and fruits and all that, they're obviously made by God. They're obviously. Yeah, but let me put some caveats on that. First, the people that eat mainly plants, the ones that are around tropical areas and eat fruit, they're nearer to the equator. Okay? And they're often more active because they're out in sunny weather. There's less seasons, so they don't require hibernation or keeping warm in homes if they're humans. And they're often, because they're more active and stuff like that, they burn off the sugars that are in their system from the plants they eat. And some of the other sugars that they don't burn off yet, those plants are eaten from the bacteria inside of them, and that's called fermentation. Anytime a bacteria eats a sugar or a carb, it is a fermentation. And what is the result of fermentation? A short chain fatty acid. And so the best vegetables for humans to eat, if they're going to eat them, are fermented vegetables. No lie. Fermented vegetables, they're the best ones. Because they have short chain fatty acids. Now, let's talk about the fat part of it here too. Because I mentioned that you have two things working in tandem in order to build our structure, our machinery. Fats and proteins and fats. Well, the fat component largely adds to energy. And often the question is, which one do I want, more carbs or more fats for energy? Well, let me lay out a few facts and then use an analogy to help us understand this, of what's good for us, okay? First off, a fatty acid is a long chain, and it has often the same basic elements as a carb, but it's not a ring-like structure. It's more of like a ladder, and it's easy to disassemble. So the metabolizing of fats is actually causes less energy, a little bit less energy. So when you metabolize fats, first off, fats are carried in the blood. They cannot go into the blood and roam around like a sugar can. And that's why the body has to highly regulate the sugar. And that requires energy. So when you eat, you have a glucose spike, which often causes tiredness. If you eat a carb, carbs will make you more tired after you eat them in general. Fats do not in general. But a fat it has to be carried in the blood by a cholesterol, okay? And, or another lipid-like or fat-like substance. In other words, it cannot roam around like a sugar can. And usually when the fat does go into the bloodstream, it's allowed right in. Sugars are not allowed right in. Sometimes they are when we overwhelm the body, but if you have an open the door creaked open a little bit more, and you're forcing your body, you will force it to have more sugar than it needs, and then your body has to do it a lot. It has to metabolize in order for you to live and not die, and that causes energy. So the cost of eating a fat versus a carb, even though both of them are used to burn energy, creation of energy, the cost of the fat is less. And even more so, the output after you burn the fat is more than the carb. So what energy am I talking about? ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. It's the energy currency of every cell, and the mitochondria in each cell makes it. And in order to make it, in that process, there's a thing called oxidation. And in that process of oxidation and burning fuel and stuff like that, there's other things, going on. It can get pretty complex, but the basic process of ATP production will cause a lot more energy output from the same volume of fat than it does carbs. So let's use a case in point. Let's say you have 5 structures, molecularly speaking, of fat versus 5 of carbs. Well, once the fat is not stored, if the fat is being burned by the body, in order to create energy or ATP, it will, out of those 5, it will do twice the amount as carbs. So let's say carbs give you 10 ATP from 5, 10 energies, we'll call them, from 5 carbs. Well, the fat will give you 20 energies from 5 carbs, or from 5 fats. So you have to remember that fat is, you get more bang for your buck, okay, when you eat it. When you eat a fat and then it burns for energy, or an already stored fat makes ketones, which is the basis of the ketogenic diet, that will also be part and parcel of creating ATP. Either way, fat burning is much more cost effective and energy outputting than carbohydrate burning. So if we want more energy, we should be preferring fats over carbs. Not because carbs are evil, but because they're like kindling versus the firewood of fat. Fat, if you took a bunch of really thin sticks, you wanted to build a fire and you wanted to burn the fire, burn sticks, and when you were burning sticks, you wanted to make a meal out of it, you wouldn't just gather kindling and think that you're good. You would gather some kindling to start the fire, to give it a spark, and then you would still have stored up a whole bunch of firewood, which is like fat. See, in the energy kingdom, that's what I'm going to call it, fat is like firewood, and carbs are like kindling. They both play a role. Carbohydrates can be used by the body to burn as fuel for the purpose of energy creation, and so can fat. But carbs burn up faster, and that's why you get hungrier faster on a sugar-based or carbohydrate-based diet. And that's why people who get addicted to sugars, addicted to plants, veggies, fruit, grains, their whole lifestyle centered around that, those people are constantly more hungry. But the people that eat more fat and proteins, they're filled up more, and then there's more extended time periods of fasting between meals, and they don't need to snack as much because they're more satiated. But if you want more bang for your buck when you eat the fuel source, eat fat, not carbs. If you want more bang for your buck and still want to have certain vegetables from the plant kingdom, ferment them and let the little bacteria eat them, creating short-chain fatty acids, and then you eat the fatty acids that come in the fermented food. Okay? So the ideal diet, let me enlarge this because we're kind of done with the chart. The ideal human diet is primarily a carnivorous or ketogenic Atkins diet, high protein and fat, low carb. Okay? Now, there's one or two things I wanted to address before I ended this video, and that is, what about the stronger animals that eat more carbs? How do they build muscle? Like, for example, a cow, which eats grass, and a gorilla, which eats, they don't hunt humans. What about them? Aren't they don't they somehow blow out of the water and completely shatter what I'm saying here? No, they don't. Here's why. What we share in common with a cow and an ape is the necessity for fat and protein, or the building of muscle. But what we don't share in common with them is the process of getting there. So let's start out with the cow. A cow has 4 stomachs. It ruminates. And notice, when it's eating, it's grazing. Bison do it. They graze all day long as much as they can. They're constantly eating. They ruminate on their food. And they have 4 stomachs. Multiple chamber stomachs. It's a natural process. If you want to eat processed food, eat the processes that God made in the animal. It's funny, we call a corporate building a plant. In the animal plant, weird, or in the animal building, the animal body. In the animal body, there are different kinds of processes that go on depending on the animal. They all require fats and proteins, generally speaking, to move around and be mobile. So they need a more complex set of machinery that will, at the end of that process, store the energy output of fat and protein. But the pathways of getting there are different depending on the animal or the animal machine. Cows, when they eat grass, they still have bacteria in their bodies which break it down and turn it into fat. And that's why cows still have a lot of fat in their body, even though they're eating carbs. And you would think that carbs don't cause fat, but they do. That's why bears eat a lot of carbs also, along with meat, in order to fatten up for the winter. Because when you start eating excess amounts of sugars or carbs, your body has to get it out of the bloodstream, and when that happens, it has to store it somewhere. If it doesn't digest it right away, that's what makes you fat. But going back to the ape and the cow, we are similar to the ape and the cow in the sense of what's needed to move around, fat and protein. The pathway of getting there is different for each one of us. The cow has 4 stomachs, and in those 4 stomachs, specifically when it comes to fat, there is a creation of fat through fermentation, and there's also sometimes what they eat from the farmers who feed them grains instead of grass. And technically they should be eating more grass than grains. Sometimes it's better to, kind of like how humans should be eating ripe fruit, not unripened fruit. Same way, cows should be eating the full grown grass that's already grown on the ground, not the grains. The grains cause them to have more health issues for some reason. So that's why a lot of the grain-fed cows have more fat in their tissue, and that's what makes up like the really fatty cows, like the Wagyu beef. Anyways, what about the ape? The ape doesn't have the same thing that the cow does. But the ape is incredibly strong also, stronger than us. But notice what the ape does have in its stomach. Many of them have gigantic stomachs. And even the males, not because they're pregnant, the males can't get pregnant. They have gigantic stomachs because inside those stomachs, all the plants that they're eating all the time are being fermented because the gut in there, they have a huge gut, like with a larger density and amount of bacteria in that gut to break down the plant tissue or the carb tissue. And remember, by the way, little fun fact. Sugars and carbohydrates are the only food source that can be eaten by parasites and bacteria, generally speaking, I think. In other words, they don't eat fat. So if you have create an environment within your own body where you're barely putting any sugar in, you're not going to get cancer. You'll get less parasites because they love sugars. Because that's what their food is. Because that's what their bodies can digest. Bacteria and parasites can only digest the simpler molecular structured carbohydrates, whereas they cannot digest the fats. Their bodies don't know what to do with the fat. Larger animals like us and apes and cows do. Our bodies do know what to do with fat. Anyways, so, take more and more sugar out of your diet, and the less and less prone to getting cancer and having parasites and having health problems that you'll have. Which is weird because you would think, well, what about the vegans and vegetarians that don't get cancer or that, that seem to be living a very healthy life? Well, many of them live near the equator, like the ones that eat the fruit. But they're out in the sun all day, keeping active, burning the sugar more. So if you live near the equator in a tropical area, which means, by the way, location matters. This is like real estate. Location, location, location. Location matters. And the location matters for your diet. So if you live in more tropical weather and you're out in the sun more, and the sun will give you enough vitamin D, which will help out with your system as a whole, but it also helps out with the metabolizing, and it helps out with taking away bad effects of sugar because it gives you a system that's able to burn the sugar more. So, you can afford eating more carbohydrates, generally speaking, if you live in more tropical climates. But if you live in climates with 4 seasons, or where animals hibernate, or where, it becomes winter outside, you have less of a you should be eating less carbohydrates in general. And that's why the people in the far north, which don't have any access to most plants, maybe some berries during the summertime, generally eat way more animals. Way more animals. And they still live. And they live very healthy. And their organs, their vital organs, have good health numbers. So context of location matters. Your structure of your body matters. And those of us that share in common with each other, which are mobile, like apes, cows, and humans, well, there's distinctions even between us. So your gut matters. What's in your gut? How the food is processed. But suffice it to say, in conclusion, because we have muscles that require nutrients for the muscles to move the bones and make us move around without being tired all the time, we should be eating way more fat and protein and way less carbohydrates as humans who are living in the northeast of North America. By the way, people that say that meat eating is carcinogenic, which means cancer causing, they're completely wrong. First and foremost, these people cherry pick also, like, and they make themselves sound so smart, but when you eat mainly meat, you have less sugar in your system that cannot feed the cancer. If you eat an omnivore diet that still has a lot of sugar but a lot of meat, cancer does come in, but it's not because of the meat that they're eating. It's because of the carbs that are feeding the either parasites that the cancer is, or the out of control cell regrowth and repetition of the cancer cell, which will require immediate energy like a sugar. So whether the cancer is technically a replicating out of control cell that's been mutating, requiring quick access to food in order for it to divide and multiply, or if it's parasitic in nature, either way, it requires a sugar-based system in order for it to thrive. So, but people who eat literally carnivore, ketogenic carnivore that is very high protein and fat, very low. Some doctors say you should be less than 20 grams of carbs in a day. Very low amount. In other words, when you put food on your plate, give yourself don't give yourself a piece of meat and 2 vegetables. Give yourself 4 pieces of meat and 1/8 of the vegetables that you normally intake. That's the optimal or ideal healthy diet for a human being based upon its structure, and for us even more so based upon where we live too. And furthermore, notice which are often bigger. Animals are bigger than fruit. They're not usually always bigger than trees, but they're bigger than fruit. They're also bigger than bushes and plants and vegetables. Many fish are bigger than seaweed. Generally speaking, the size of the food corresponds to the quantitative amount that we should be ingesting. It's almost like God set it up that way. When you sit down to eat food, because generally speaking, vegetables are smaller than cow, and if you have beef on the table and vegetables on the table, because the cows are way bigger than the veggies, eat way more of the cow. Now, that sounds so simplistic and reductionistic. I'm reducing it down to such a simple way of looking at it that most people will roll their eyes and say, this guy's a quack. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's an idiot. He didn't even cite a study. I'm not going to get into citing studies right now. I'm going to get into very logical common sense. And I'm no dummy. Neither are you guys. We just got to use our critical thinking skills. What does our body require based upon its machinery? What is the best thing to put in it? We need diesel fuel, not regular gas in terms of fuel. So we need fat, way more of it than we need carbohydrates in terms of fuel, especially those of us in the north who are not under the sun all the time. And if you want to eat vegetables, go ahead. You can do that. Just keep in mind, and I'm gonna use the Bible here for one thing. Ezekiel 47 and Revelation chapter 22. They both mention, or Revelation 21. They're both visions of kind of like this period of paradise. And in these visions, the biblical authors mention how, in the state of no longer being cursed, leaves of plants or bushes like vegetables and even fruits, all that stuff, the plant kingdom, will be given for the healing of the nations. In other words, plants, carbohydrated based or living organisms, the stationary, immobile, non-moving things that are connected to the ground, have a role to play. They play a role, but it's a very specific role. It's for healing. And lo and behold, all the major pharmaceutical drugs are based upon what they have found out in the kingdom of what you call plants and trees and grasses and stuff. A lot of the chemicals found in plants and in forests and in rainforests, all those chemicals led to the creation of pharmaceuticals because they broke down and analyzed what was in those chemicals, and they figured out from that you can create medicines that alter the chemistry of the human body for good or for bad, depending on how much you give to the human body. So the body will be given medicine. In other words, plants are the basis of medicine. And the Bible attested to that thousands of years ago. So for herbs in medicinal purposes, our primary substance to use is a plant kingdom. For eating normal meals of intake for nutrients and to move around and to work, our primary substance to ingest is animals, based upon our structure of our body. So for healing, be vegetarian generally. But in terms of quick healing, or not quick healing, but like symptom control or chemistry changes in the body, stuff like that, plants are there for that. We just have to gain a knowledge of what they can do. Cinnamon can thin the blood and also help out with too much built up congestion, as you found out. So it plays a role. But in terms of meals themselves, for fuel and for energy, over 90% of what you put in your mouth should be primarily animal product. And if you do put plant product of any kind, fruits or vegetables, make sure that the fruit is in season based on where you live, generally speaking. You're not supposed to eat it year round. Eat it after you eat the protein and fat. Technically, you should be separating them all the time. That's for another day. But if you do eat the carbs or the sugars, eat them for dessert or afterwards so that they don't go into the bloodstream as fast. So you don't have constant glucose spikes, which causes insulinemia or a hyper state of insulin in your blood, which also causes issues. Yeah, so fruits, eat them as desserts. That's the new dessert. Eat them only after you eat proteins and fats. Try to separate them and eat them in season. And as for vegetables, well, they're the medicines, generally speaking. Eat them as medicines in much lower dosages, because the dosage often is what makes it something toxic or not, the dosage amount. And in terms of just meals, eating food as a human, all animal-based or mainly animal-based. Now, if you do want to put something on the table with the beef or with the lamb, with the chicken, with the pork if you're dad, but not if you're mom, then make sure it's got fat in it in the form of short-chain fatty acids, which means if you're going to eat the veggies, eat the fermented veggies, the fermented ones, because those have fat in them. They're still carbohydrate based in their original existence, but because of what the bacteria did to them, they now have short-chain fatty acids in them, and the body will benefit from that much more than it will benefit from the original state of that plant, because the original state was only a carbohydrate. But when that carbohydrate's eaten by a bacteria, it becomes a fat. And so that's another process you want. You want the final product of what the bacteria do to plants for you to ingest, because it creates fat. And you want more fat than you do carbs in terms of fuel. And the proteins, that's a given. You want enough of that in your system for muscle growth. And so anyways, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you now realize that the optimal human diet is a high fat and protein, low carb diet. Depending on where you're at, your body will tolerate more or less. But those of us who live in North America, northeast part of North America, at this time, the stage of the game, who also have to deal with agricultural practices that spray glyphosate on many of the plant products, which means they're even more dangerous for us. Glyphosate is hugely dangerous. They're hormone disruptors up the wazoo. So my recommendation, based upon everything I've studied, is a carnivore-based diet or carnivore-esque diet. I'm not a pure carnivore. I still eat some vegetables. I'll still eat mashed potatoes. But I put a lot of butter in it. I love butter. But I don't eat it much. And the spices and herbs that I have in some of the sausages, they're not much. Over 90% of what I put in my mouth is animal-based, animal product. It's eggs, it's dairy. Well, dairy actually has carbs in it because it's got a sugar called lactose. That's for another shorter video. Lactose, when you're supposed to have lactose, blah, blah, blah. Everyone, to a certain extent, is lactose intolerant. But that needs further explanation. Anyways, I tried to make this simple. Hopefully the chart helped out. It's kind of practice for the future. I will make future videos shorter. But I wanted to break this down and just look at it from the perspective of what's the ideal human diet? Well, how do we know what that is? Don't worry about the studies that people cite, because you're going to have people cite studies all live long day and they're going to cherry pick the data, all that stuff. Look at it from a common sense perspective. We move around above the ground. We're more complex than plants are. And so, because animals have the same requirement for energy and protein to build the muscles to move on the ground, then when we kill the animal to eat it, it will have the higher amounts of minerals, vitamins, macronutrients, fats, and proteins. It will have a much higher density of all those nutrients that are needed for our bodies that are in the animal tissue. They will have it much more than in the plant and fruit tissue. That's not to say plants and fruits are bad. It's just to say what's the priority, what's the better, not good versus bad. Good versus best. That's what we're dealing with. So what's the optimal best human diet? Carnivore diet. Animal-based diet. It is the best diet on earth for human beings because of the way our bodies are built by God. Hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot more science I could get into, but that's just going to... Forget about that for now. Just use common sense. It's something the doctors don't even use this half the time. And when they try to use it, I mean, they're so brainwashed, it's crazy. And even the corporate, even the public, generally speaking, which thinks meat eating is always bad all the time, causes cancer, carcinogenic, raises mTOR and then makes you age faster. All the arguments I've heard against the idea of meat eating, saturated fat is bad for you. These people don't even know what saturated fat is. They don't know that it's saturated with hydrogen atoms, which then bond with oxygen roaming atoms, which makes meat naturally inflammatory because you don't have oxygen roaming around, which causes inflammation. And then when the oxygen and the hydrogen connect together because of the saturated fat, it creates water in your body because your body can create water as well as ingest it because water is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. See, I can get into the science also. Saturated fat is good for you on a scientific level. In fact, it's some of the best stuff for you. What's saturated fat? lamb is a perfect case of it. Beef is. A lot of red meat is saturated fat. But I wanted to start out with a common sense approach with an easy to understand column of the movers and shakers, which have requirements for their system much closer to ours, and then the stationary ones, which don't require as much energy because they're not moving. So which should we be eating more of? The movers and the shakers. The animals. What do we eat these for? Well, for dessert and for medicine. The sweet, and maybe some medicines are bitter. The sweet and the bitter. So, there's a role and there's a purpose for everything in the world. We just have to figure out what it is. And when it comes to our normal food intake, our everyday, day-to-day, what we cook intake, I highly advise that the overwhelming majority of what you put in your mouth is red meat and eggs and salt, but that's another, salt is it's a whole video in and of itself. And I'm going to send you one. I'm going to make these shorter. Tell me what you think of this once you watch this and listen to it. But hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you looked at it in a non-brainwashed way, unlike what our public has given us, and our FDA, and our government. They don't care about us. They just rub elbows with corporations who want to make money, and they're all making money together. And, yeah. So, anyways, get out of the Ponzi scheme. Get out of the poisoners. They poison you with their shitty food. Go with more natural food. And the more natural food is both the plants, fruits, grains, meats, birds, beasts, fish, paleo diet. All the natural stuff that your grandma and grandpa recognized also. That's the stuff you want to go with. But then that's for good eating. But for best eating based upon mobility, you then narrow it down to a higher percentage of animals and a lower percentage of plants and fruits, vegetables and fruits, and grains. And grains should be the least amount. We really don't need grains at all. We don't need grains. But we still use them for making noodles and breads and stuff. So, so we're not going to get rid of them. But American grains are highly poisonous. So if you want to eat grains, you got to go to Europe to eat grains. They will not cause inflammation. European bread, that they have regulations that don't allow for the spraying of glyphosate on their wheat fields and on their grain fields. So, if you want to eat bread, it's better to eat bread in Europe, not in America. Our bread is, generally speaking, poisoned to the extent that it causes an ongoing set of inflammation over the course of the lifetime. And that causes further damage. Anyways, hopefully I also showed you, I know a little bit of what I'm talking about, even though I'm not a nutritionist and I never went to school. And I never was a doctor or anything like that. But that doesn't matter. I still studied. I still did my homework. And I wanted to answer the question for myself. What do I want to put in my body so that I have a healthier older age? Now, you may look at me and say, well, he still looks like he's got too much visceral fat on his body. There is something you have to take into account. I don't have a thyroid gland. Thyroid gland and the endocrine system regulates food metabolizing. I have to deal with a whole other variable that some people don't even have to worry about. Some people could just put more iodine in their system, not kill their thyroid gland off, and they're good. Eat more fat. That'll help out with the hormone production, and have more iodine, which will help out with regulating the thyroid gland. But I don't even have a thyroid gland. So I have to rely on alternative methods for the T4 and the T3 hormone. And so I take desiccated thyroid from animals, and I also take the pharmaceutical form of the T4 hormone, which is created by the thyroid gland in both humans and animals. So so I'm not anti-pharmaceutical, and I'm not anti-plant and fruit and veggie. I'm just trying to prioritize what I use and for what I use and how much of it for optimal health. And that's what I did. I started asking myself, Nick, what are you going to do for what you know you have to do as a North American white male at the age of early 40s in, certain degrees above the equator or north of the equator in the Northeast? What is the optimal diet for you? And mom and dad, you have to ask, what's the optimal diet for you guys? Well, I can say for sure, heavy meat-based diet with red meat, salt, water, and hydration. If you're going to eat veggies, fermented veggies, if you're going to eat fruit, in season only, as dessert only, primarily after you already ate proteins, which means it slowed the sugar spike into your bloodstream. And you want to always do that because you don't want to cause a sugar traffic jam in your bloodstream. That could cause and trigger another heart attack for either one of you. Another stroke for mom. Another primary heart event for either one of you. So blood sugar spikes are more dangerous for you guys at this point in the game. You have to take that into account. Which means what I gave you in this video is all the more paramount and important. Knowing now that the plant kingdom is the kingdom of carbs and the kingdom of sugars. Well, anytime you eat noodles, bread, flour, which makes pastries, desserts, fruit, vegetables, all of it is sugar. It's all sugar. It's all carbs. It's that molecular structure, that specific molecular structure that is fundamentally different than the fat and the protein. And the more you eat of those and bombard your system with them, the more in danger you're putting yourself towards a primary cardiovascular event. What they call a primary event, like a stroke, aneurysm, blood clot, and so on and so forth. I highly doubt it will be a blood clot for either one of you, because mom is, that I think, taking a blood thinner, and dad, you're taking cinnamon. So it would probably be something like, if you were to have a heart event, blood clot would be further down along the list. You would have to worry more about a stroke, because you have to make sure that you actually have blood flow. A blood clot will stop blood flow, but there are other things that stop it too. And anyways, that's enough of this. It's been a long video. Hopefully you were willing to watch all of it, because it all makes sense, and I can make so much more sense. And I will make sure, trust me, in the future, there will be snapshots. This is a longer video because I had to give you the foundation for the optimal human diet. Optimal, ideal human diet. Not diet that's good for, 40% of human beings. No. A diet that's best for a large majority of human beings. And even people that live in the tropical areas, back in the day, would they eat fruit and berries? Yeah, of course. But they'd also hunt for animals. Because, why? Because our bodies need it. Our bodies need what's inside the animal tissue for our bodies to move just like the animals move. Common sense. Well, it's not so common, but should be common. Anyways, having said that, hopefully this has been helpful towards both of you. Hopefully I talked slow and long. The reason why it's a longer video, I talked slower and I wanted us to together really ingest this idea, this material. What is the body structured as? And what does that tell us about what we should put in it? And hopefully I also gave enough little golden nuggets of details, like creation of energy or ATP, twice the amount from fats as opposed to carbs. Hopefully you are able to remember some of this stuff so that next time you eat food, you don't have to feel guilty for eating a vegetable. That's not the point. You don't have to feel guilty for eating a fruit. You just are more educated on the choices you make behind what you put in your mouth. The foundation behind what you put on your mouth is going to be based upon a thorough education of commonsensical, factual, logical look at what is our body made for and what is the best thing to give it. Diesel fuel, not regular gas. Firewood, not kindling. The same stuff that's at the end product of what's in animal tissue as opposed to the end product of what's stored in the plant. Plants primarily store carbs, are made up of carbs. Animal tissue is made up of fat and protein. We are the type of living organism that needs more fat and protein and less of carbs. And our diet should correspond to that. It's pretty simple. And God knew what he was doing. He provided both for specific reasons. So my thought process is he provided the plant kingdom for more healing and stuff. He provided the animal kingdom for meals, generally speaking. And there's overlap between both, but you can do that, So, hopefully this did not fall on deaf ears, and you are blessed because of it. Let me know what you think of this next time we talk, and I will talk to you later. God bless you both. I love you both. All right, I'm turning it off now.